Welcome live from Indianapolis. It's another Live with Kevin, eventually another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Make sure you stay. I know what happens on video. Sometimes people click on pass. They don't stay. I want you to stay. I hope you'll stay. And the first thing I'd like you to do is to get actively involved here by going to the comment section of wherever you're watching and say hello. Tell us where you're located. You can do that. Now, if you're watching later, you don't have to do that. But you can if you want. But if you're here live, love to have you do that so we know where you're from. And while you're here, I really would prefer that you be actively involved. So here's what that looks like. If you and my guest and I were sitting around a table having a cup of coffee, if you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it. That's what naturally would happen. So why not do that here, even though we're virtual? Because you can go to the comment section of whatever social platform you're in, and you can comment, you can ask, you can share. Do that. When you do, this will be more valuable for you. You'll be more actively involved. It'll make for a better conversation, eventually a better podcast, and you'll get more value from it for yourself too. So I hope that you'll do all of those things. And now that I've mentioned twice that this will be on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, I should do the live open for that. So Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. Sometimes I've jokingly said that accountability is the longest 4-letter word in the English language. And there is often truth in jest. And yet when we think about and create accountability in the correct and most effective ways, it is not a 4-letter word. It is a significant driver to our success. Accountability is our conversation today. And so welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to us, you could have joined us. Well, actually, in the future, you could join us live while we're on video. If you would like to do that, you need to know when and where to do that. And the best way to do that is to join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, which are 2 of the platforms where these things originally stream live. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get all set up, to get connected to what we're doing, what's up, and when these episodes of originally simulcast live stream. I hope you will do that. And I hope that you will remember that today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective, a new set of tools in order to create the results that their organizations and team members want and need. And that's what Flexible Leadership provides you. You can learn more and order your copy at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And having done all of our housekeeping and all of our introducing, let me introduce the most important part of today's episode, and that is our guest. His name is Michael Timms. He is a leadership development consultant, author, and founder of Avail Leadership, and has empowered thousands of senior leaders to adopt powerful leadership habits and practices that drive measurable improvements in their team performance, engagement, and results. His latest book is How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, as promised. That is the focus of our conversation today. It's also the basis for his TEDx talk, How to Claim Your Leadership Power. And you can look that up as you know how to do. And with that, I will welcome Michael to the show.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks so much for being here, sir.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
All the way from British Columbia.
Yeah.
When we're doing this virtually, I suppose that doesn't matter in a way. And yet there we go. All the way from British Columbia.
It's a connected world. We're all connected.
And so we've got someone here from Seattle, and we've got, and so welcome Rob and welcome Mark. See, for all of you that I just said, if you wanted to join us live, see, if you do that, get connected and signed up so you can do that in the future. So what I want to start with, Michael, is a place I start with many of our guests, and that is for you to tell us a little bit more about your journey. So obviously you didn't, well, I'm presuming that you didn't wake up when you were 6 years old and say, I'm going to be a leadership development trainer and author and coach. Tell us a little bit about how you end up doing this kind of work.
Sure. If you go way back, it was back in university when my parents gave me the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I read that book and I was like, this is exactly what I want to do with my life. And then I was like, well, how can I do that? How do I kind of change my academic direction here? And I focused in human resources, got an MBA and specialized in HR, and then did none of that in HR. Like I thought I was going to be doing leadership development, organizational behavior, and no, in HR you're just doing hiring, firing, training, or actually not very much training, but policy, things like that. Anyways, throughout my career in industry, my story might not be unlike many of your viewers, which is my bosses got progressively worse. My first boss he was a great guy, really cared about me. And I had 5 bosses in industry and each one got progressively worse. And the last guy was just awful, super micromanager, just destroyed my confidence. And I remember thinking, man, I don't want anybody to feel the way that this guy is making me feel. And that's when I decided to get back into my love of leadership and helping organizations teach people not just how to not be, asshole bosses, but how to actually bring out the best in other people. How, what can I do as a person in a position of authority to actually help people rise to their greatest level and become their best selves. And in so doing, help the organization achieve its goals. So yeah, that was kind of how I got into this.
And so one way to think about achieving those things is through that very long 4-letter word that I described of accountability. So do you want to say any more very specifically about why obviously we're talking about leadership and your book title is How Leaders and then Inspire Accountability. So obviously you've talked about the leadership piece. Why is accountability the focus of the book and much of your work?
Yeah, when I started consulting about 10 years ago, I focused on succession planning. And what many people don't know is the very, very first step in succession planning is to come up with a promotion criteria. So what is the criteria by which we're going to promote people into leadership positions? Typically, it's basically who's the most technically competent, who's been here the longest, which are not good predictors of
which are the wrong predictors.
Exactly. So what I would do is I'd meet with focus groups in different organizations and that I was working with, and I would ask them, what are the leadership characteristics that have led to specific positive outcomes in your organization? And they would tell me stories, and we would connect the dots between leadership behaviors and positive outcomes. And you're not going to believe what the number one competency was that came up literally, I kid you not, like I did this dozens and dozens and dozens of focus groups. Every single focus group talked about accountability as being the most important leadership competency. And so I got really, really interested in accountability. It wasn't just like, it actually came up in a couple of different ways. So, people said, it was leaders who demonstrated, who modeled accountability, right? That was a key competency. But another sort of related but different is leaders who actually help others be accountable. And another one is how leaders can help the entire organization. Like what changes can you make to the organization, to the structure, to the processes to help everybody get better results, which is what accountability is about.
We're going to talk about all those things as we go. The reason, let me just go back up and I didn't tell everybody, I did not tell Michael how I was going to introduce this. I did not tell him that I sometimes say accountability is the longest 4-letter word in the English language. Here's why I say that's true, or can be true, is that we never pull the word up until there's a problem. Right? I'm going to hold you accountable. But what you're saying, both in the conversation so far and in the book, is that it's ultimately about how as leaders can we help people be accountable, you just said, which is a totally different thing than holding you accountable because you screwed up, right? And that sort of thing. So you want to comment on that before we dive in any further?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that is a challenge when actually it was the guy in charge of the TEDx when I did my TEDx talk. I wanted to call the talk accountability. He's like, Michael, nobody wants to hear about accountability. And it's just going to put people to sleep. But the reality is accountability is a positive thing and gives you power to get the right results for yourself and for other people. But the challenge is, as you pointed out, is that the way we use accountability is as a weapon, right? I'm going to hold you accountable. Or when we hear it in the news media, it's in that way. It's that politician must be held accountable. And really what they're saying is that politician is at fault, they are to blame, and they should be punished. And so what we have done effectively as a society is that we have turned the word accountability and used it as a euphemism for what we're really talking about, which is blame and punishment, which is ironic because blame is the absolute antithesis of accountability.
Opposite of 100%. I found myself, as I was reading the book, Michael, nodding my head a lot, but I also found that there's some things that you wrote that you say I'm almost exactly the same way I do. So I don't know if that means that both of us need to learn something new, or we're just in alignment. That may be both. Before we go any further, I probably should ask you, like, what is your actual definition of accountability?
Accountability is taking ownership of results and focusing on what you can do to improve future results. So, hey, I'm going to own whatever my situation is. I'm going to own it. I'm not going to, sit back and blame other people for why I'm here, because that's not helpful. And I'm going to focus my attention on what I can do, not what you can do, not what you can do, not what the government can do, not what my boss can do, but what can I do to improve my future outcomes.
So on page 30 in the book, I'm not going to make you, this is not a book report, so I will read the quote that I want you to comment on, because it's the transition into the rest of our conversation. You say on page 30, accountability is the fulcrum upon which leadership is placed and which gives leadership its power. Let me read it again. Accountability is the fulcrum upon which leadership is placed and which gives leadership its power. What do you mean by that?
It was actually Stephen Covey who introduced this idea to me that leadership is the ultimate lever. Give me a lever long enough and I can move the world, right? And leadership is that lever. But a lever, to be effective, needs a fulcrum. And so you place that lever on this fulcrum. And the challenge is when you have low accountability, when you're as a person in a leadership position, when you're modeling low accountability, it's like moving the fulcrum kind of all the way, in the wrong direction. And there's
there's nothing left.
There's no leverage. There's no leverage, right? Because leadership power must be earned. There's authority, and I can make you do what I want you to do in the short term if I threaten you. Or
I can probably get some compliance, in other words.
You can get some compliance, but true leadership, which is when I leave the room, when I'm not around, are you still going to be doing what I asked you to do, even when there is no kind of obvious carrot and stick, to get you to do those things? And that's the real power of leadership is, will I follow this person's direction, even when they're not around? And we've seen, the great leaders, of this world, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, these people, Mother Teresa, these people who they still are moving people. They are still inspiring people to move in the direction that they asked them to move in, because they have earned their respect. And that's the really cool thing about accountability is the ultimate fulcrum. And when you are modeling high accountability, you move that fulcrum all the way over to the other side to give you maximum leadership power. And that's the message really that I would like to get across to the world. is that as you demonstrate accountability, it does give you that true leadership power to have people want to follow you. The problem is when people call me up, Kevin, usually it's the CEO calls me up and says, Michael, we need to bring you in here because I think we have an accountability problem. And, if we
He's
can
not
just
talking about him. He's talking about everybody else.
He's talking about everybody else. And I'm like, dude, that is the problem. And
or it's at least part of the problem for sure.
Right. Well, he is part of the problem. But people in leadership positions don't see themselves as part of the problem. And that is the problem, right? That is the problem when people in leadership positions don't see themselves as part of the problem.
Which gets at one of the habits, which we'll get to in a second. There's two other things though, before we get the book is built around the 3 habits. We're going to get to those, everybody, and we won't be able to go into the depth that I might like or that you might like. And the reason for that is so important. So you go get the book. So I'm talking with Michael Timms, the author of How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, 3 habits that make or break leaders and elevate performance. So, but before we get there, there's 2 other things I want to ask you about first. One is in this book, which you've now outlined and we've been starting to talk about, you have a chapter, excuse me, about systems thinking. And I'm curious how you see systems thinking fitting in to this conversation.
Yeah. Systems thinking is, so just to give you just a quick summary of the 3 habits of personal accountability. First of all, actually, before I even get to the 3 habits of personal accountability and systems thinking, I will just digress for one moment. And I think it's really important that people understand something critically important about accountability. And accountability is about results. It's not about actions. It's not about checking the box. It's not about doing the things on your to-do list. It's about taking ownership of results. And there's a really big difference between taking ownership of results and taking ownership of actions. Taking ownership of actions is saying, hey, I'm doing everything on my job description. I'm done. Kevin, it's, you're the boss. It's up to you. You're really accountable for what's going on. Taking ownership of results is saying, hey, look, or telling people, hey, look, I don't really care, what you need to do. Like, this is the goal. These are the results that we're after. Please go get these results. Here's the, basic guidelines. Stay within these guidelines, right? But go get those results. And that actually frees people up to actually problem solve around the inevitable obstacles that they will face, right? But if you're saying, hey, look, just do this, just do this, do this. If I encounter an obstacle on one of these tasks that you give me, I'm going to say, oh, sorry, Kevin, I can't do what you asked me to do because I've encountered this obstacle on this thing. But if you just said, hey, Michael, just go get this thing, I will go get that thing. That unleashes my potential, my brain power, and I will problem solve around those things that come up to achieve that goal. So anyways, I think that's an important digression. I think that's an important starting point before we talk about, how to inspire accountability in others. Kind of step 1 really is to focus people on results, not tasks. And I think that is where many leaders have created a culture of blame, finger pointing, unintentionally, because people are saying, well, I did what I was supposed to do. I did what you told me to do.
I did my job.
I'm done. I'm out. And that's not the kind of culture that we're trying to create. But leaders don't realize that they're creating that culture when they're focusing people on tasks.
So if I can take that one step further,
yeah, sure.
I've been ranting for a long time about a very related topic, which will connect directly to this. And that's the point that we think about. People say that here's an actual 4-letter word, busy. And busy means I've got a lot of tasks to do, but it doesn't say anything about what did you get accomplished. Like, productivity isn't about time spent. It's about actions. It's about outcomes, right? And it's about, to use your language, it's about results. And so that same thinking that gets us fouled up or fouls our thinking around productivity is exactly the same thing you're talking about here. And they end up being directly connected, because then everyone is now focused as, well, I did my stuff. I did the list. I followed the process, as opposed to, did we get the results?
Yeah, exactly. And so if leaders can start, if you're a leader and you're listening to this podcast, I would encourage you to first get clear, help your organization get clear on what are we after? Are we after, people completing a list of tasks, or actually after outcomes. And if you are after outcomes, which I suspect you are, well, then focus people on those outcomes and get really clear on those outcomes. That's your first step to creating a culture of accountability and excellence. So anyways, but I do want to get to what you were talking about, which is, systems thinking, and how does systems thinking apply to accountability and personal accountability and modeling accountability? For that, I think probably the 3 habits kind of work in sequence. So probably I'd better start with, is it okay if I start with 1 and 2, and I'll give you a brief overview. So the 3 habits of personal accountability. So how you can influence others, the most powerful thing you can do to influence other people to step up is for you to raise your level of accountability. And know that every leader, if you're in a leadership position, typically you are demonstrating a pretty high level of accountability. You probably wouldn't have gone into a leadership position if you're not. You're modeling it to a certain extent, but it's taking it to that next level. When you take it to the kind of remarkable leadership level of modeling accountability, that's really where you get that power to actually influence other people to step up their game. And it really comes down to 3 habits to take it to that next level. And the first habit is to don't blame, to stop blaming. When things go wrong, we are naturally inclined, most of us are naturally inclined to find someone or something to blame for our problems. That's not helpful because it kills accountability in ourselves, right? And it says, well, I have no power. If 100% of this problem is Kevin's fault, then I have absolutely no power to fix it. I've just given away my power to Kevin, to solve this problem, right? And I've become a helpless victim. So it kills accountability in yourself, but it also kills accountability in other people. When you blame people for problems, it puts them into fight or flight mode, and they are not using. So what happens when you get into fight or flight mode? It actually shuts down your prefrontal cortex. So the problem solving part of your brain shuts down, and all you care about is defending yourself. You're not concerned about solving problems. You're concerned about defending yourself. And so when you blame people, you're actually shutting down the part of the brain that could solve the problem that you're blaming them for, but they can't because you just shut down that part of the brain. But another thing that blame does is, and there's a lot of books out right now about trust. We want to build trust, and there's a lot of thinking around how do you build trust. Here's the number one way to build trust. Stop destroying it by blaming people, right? Okay, that's the number one secret to building trust, is to stop destroying trust, because nothing kills trust quicker than blame. So anyways, habit number 1, don't blame, okay? So, okay, what do you do instead? If something goes wrong and I'm going to say, hey, I'm not going to blame people because I know it's a bad thing and it causes a lot of dysfunction. What do I do next? Next thing you should do is take a look at yourself and say, hey, look, did I have a part to play in this undesirable outcome? And it's called look in the mirror. So habit 2 is look in the mirror. And say, how may I have contributed to this problem? And when you ask yourself sincerely, you ask yourself that question, and I've done this when I'm convinced it's 100% somebody else's fault. I've said, fine, I will ask the stupid question, how may I have contributed to this problem? And when I actually verbalize that question, all of a sudden my mind is open. I'm like, oh,
well, I could have, I might have.
Actually, now that I mention it, now that I ask myself that question, I'm like, oh shoot, now I actually do see something I could have done or something I can do. And that's really empowering. Because again, now that I have taken ownership of at least part of that problem, that is my power, right? Maybe if I say, hey, I've got, 20% of this, let's say 80% of this is outside my control. It's somebody else or something else. Maybe 20% of this problem is on me, and I can kind of own about 20% of it. That's 20% more power that I now have to create a better future than my present. Okay, so that's, again, how taking ownership gives you personal power. Now, and by the way, if you sincerely ask that question and you can't see how you have contributed to this problem, it is probably worth your while to ask other people. Say, hey, like, Kevin, honestly, this is not, I don't want to blame anybody. This is a problem. I honestly can't see how I've contributed to this problem. Kevin, is there anything you can see that I could have done differently to produce a better outcome? Right? Because not only am I actually getting important information from you, potentially, I'm also building trust, because instantly you respect me more, right? Instantly, when people actually are willing to say, hey, I am willing to own this, if any of this is on me, you instantly respect them more. And you trust them more. So that's what that does. So now let's say, okay, let's say I can own a part of this, but there's other things that are going on here. Habit 3 is engineering the solution. That is systems thinking. And systems thinking says that there are likely, so as a society, science, we've done a lot of work on figuring out why bad things happen, why problems happen. And the more we learn about why problems happen, the more we have discovered that problems happen for usually a combination of factors. It's usually not 100% one person's fault, or 100% somebody else's, or this other external factor's fault, right? There's usually a combination of factors. And that's really what systems thinking helps us do, is, again, opens our minds up to other possibilities. Okay, so this is my part. Could systems have contributed? Could poor systems have kind of laid a trap for this individual to make this mistake? And I'll give you just kind of a simple example. One time, I used live polling. I use live polling in my presentations, and there's a bunch of different templates that we have. And we're constantly kind of, we'll have these templates, but then we'll use these templates for a different client. And so we've got a bunch of our templates and our work in process kind of all in the same area. One time, one of our templates got deleted. And I knew it wasn't me, and my assistant knew it wasn't her. And so it had to be the other person in our organization. And my assistant was like, I am going to murder Mel, and I was like, okay, well, before we murder Mel, let's think about, let's go through the 3 habits. First of all, let's not blame her. No, I'm still frustrated. She's still frustrated. Okay, let's look in the mirror. How may I have contributed to this problem? And as soon as I asked that question, I realized my assistant, her name was Carrie, and I said, hey, Carrie, actually, you know what? Honestly, I have almost accidentally deleted one of those templates. And then she kind of sheepishly is like, you know what? So have I, almost accidentally. And why? Why both of us almost accidentally deleted one of these things? Is because our templates were mixed in with our work in process, right? And that is a recipe for problems, right? There was
put them in a different folder, and we
put them in a different folder, right? That's all we did. And so we put them in a different folder, and I'll tell you what that did. So that's what systems thinking does, is say, hey, when we start to say what were some of the other factors that are involved, then we can build better processes to make sure that we don't make those same mistakes again. And that is really kind of the incremental path to excellence, is to think about all those other factors. And by the way, in that situation, that was going to be, because this other person in our organization reported to Carrie, that would have been, had we not walked through those 3 habits of personal accountability, that would have been a very uncomfortable conversation for Mel to have with Carrie. Because Carrie would have been, you should have been more careful. How could you have let this happen? And Mel would have felt bad because she knew she did it, right? Or she would have fought. No, maybe she forgot. Maybe she didn't know that she did it. And she would have fought Carrie on it. And it would have been a bad situation either way. But the way that situation turned out is Carrie just went to Mel and said, hey, Mel, by the way, heads up. We have realized that, one of our, we're deleting our templates by accident. We've created a new folder. Heads up, this is just our new process, right? Great. Problem solved. And what do we care? Do we really care about making Mel feel bad? And I think partly when we blame people, it just makes us feel better, right? You are stupid. We are smart, right? And we're going to beat you up. And that's partly why we blame people. But that is not helpful at all. What is helpful is solving problems to make sure that they don't happen again. And that's where systems thinking comes in.
So how do we, so as I was reading the section on engineering solutions, and I certainly follow the logic, and I think it makes sense. And you talk a lot about processes, as you've just done in this example. Where you started was, I'm going to unleash people to go own the problem and solve the problem. How do we juxtapose that against, here's our process?
Actually, processes are a fantastic way to engineer the solution. And processes, now, some organizations either, they can over process things and and
Kind of
have
where
a,
I was headed here. That's kind of where I was headed here.
so you can have a process for everything. And that then what that does is that builds kind of shrinking walls around your people's brains, right? And that gives them smaller and smaller boxes. So here's generally speaking, there's kind of two factors you want to consider before you build a process. Is it worthy of a process? Number one, is this something that will repeat again in the future several times, right? Numerous times, right? If it's going to repeat, if this is a task, if this is work that we're going to have to repeat over and over again, that's one factor to consider. Another factor to consider is how important is getting the outcome right. How important is it to get the outcome right? And
or
if
is
you've
there
got
only one right answer, which is one that I often think about, right? Is there
so
only one right answer here?
yeah,
If so, then I probably need a process.
Sometimes there is, and I'll tell you, in a situation where it's really important to follow processes is when there's a safety issue, right? We follow these processes that on the surface kind of seem kind of bureaucratic or whatever, but we follow that because we have learned through sad experience that if we don't follow this process, people get hurt. That's a really high consequence for not following a process, right?
For sure.
And so, what processes actually free up, when you're doing it strategically, when you're saying, hey, look, we're doing it for our processes that are repeat and have high consequences if it doesn't go right. What happens is that then processes or checklists, they're actually a mental hack, because what they allow you to do is not expend so much mental energy trying to make all of these micro decisions along the way. And you can just simply follow that kind of checklist for this important process while freeing up your brain to be focused on the outcome, to be focused on the results, because there might be little tweaks to that process as you're going, oh, this is a different result. This is a slightly different situation. We might need to tweak that process just a little bit, right? You can't do that, right? If you can't, it's really tough to stay focused on the outcome when you don't have a process and you're expending mental energy making all of these micro decisions along the way. And so that's the brilliant thing about engineering solutions and checklists and having processes, standard operating procedures, is really kind of, it's a mental hack, but you got to do it strategically.
So we've talked about the 3 habits. We've talked about what accountability means. We've talked about how it needs to start with us, and that it isn't something we do to others, but something we do with others, and it starts with us. Is there anything that I didn't ask or we didn't talk about, Michael, that in a couple final minutes that you would want to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things people ask me often is, okay, well, what if it really is somebody else's fault? Can we blame them? And my answer to that question is, would it be helpful? What are you trying to achieve?
How is that solving anything? Yep.
Are you trying to produce a better outcome, or are you just trying to get them to take ownership, bow their head in shame, and so the point is that it's not like there is never a time and place for you to have a tough conversation. There is, absolutely, and that is one of the ways that when I talked about there's a couple of different key leadership competencies around accountability. One is modeling accountability. The other is how do we hold other people accountable when they're not taking accountability themselves. There's a time and place to have those tough conversations, but the problem is our brains are wired such that we immediately, when there's a problem, we immediately go to, it's 100% this person's fault, or it's 100% the situation's fault, and it's 0% on me. And it's 0%.
0 and 100. It's
right.
Rarely 0 and 100.
And the other thing is it has nothing to do with the processes, right? It's all because that person's an idiot, or they're lazy, or they're unmotivated, or whatever, right? And that is actually, it's a psychological gremlin that exists in all of our brains. It's one of the most well-studied psychological phenomenon called the fundamental attribution bias. And we immediately go to other people, and we ignore all of the other factors that contribute to these problems. So my point is that first, focus on, if you want to build accountability within your organization, first model accountability yourself. actually first make sure that everybody understands that it's about outcomes. It's about results. Focus people on the results, not the tasks. But then model it yourself. And as you model it yourself, you make it way safer for other people to step up and take accountability and say, you know what? I think there are some problems. Maybe there's some process problems here. Maybe that didn't go well. And you know what? This is probably part of this is on me too. You're far more likely to get that response and get people to truly take ownership when you're modeling a high standard of accountability. And that's really all as leaders, that's the key behavior we're looking for from employees is, hey, when things go wrong, just own your part, focus on solutions, and let's make sure that it doesn't happen again, right? Fix it and then make sure that it doesn't happen again.
For sure. So a couple of things before we go, Michael, kind of shifting gears before we finish. And the first one is this. When you're not working with leaders and talking about accountability, what do you do for fun?
Oh, well, I love the outdoors. I live in British Columbia, which is kind of nature's playground. There's lots of mountains and lakes and stuff where I live. And so I like to mountain bike, I like to snow ski and hike and camp. And so, yeah. And I have 3 teenage daughters who keep me active as well, and a wonderful wife. So we like to hang out as a family and do fun stuff outside and travel.
And the only thing you knew I was going to ask, the only thing I prompted you and told you I was going to ask you is this: what are you reading these days?
Yeah, I think I try to read stuff that a lot of people are like, well, who's a great example of accountability? And one of the great, I think, models of accountability we can all learn from is Dwight Eisenhower. And I've recently read a book by his granddaughter, Susan Eisenhower, called How Ike Led. You know what? We could all stand to try to be a little bit more like Ike. And so, yeah, it's a good book recommendation.
Trivia moment: when Kevin was a kid with the last name of Eikenberry, I was often called Ike. So I have never said that out loud before in this setting. Here it is now.
Be like Ike.
Be like Ike. There you go. So where can we find out more about your work, about the book? Where do you want to point people, Michael, before we wrap up?
Yeah, so just Google Michael Timms and you'll find me. I think for people who want to get a quick introduction to my work, I think you'll enjoy the TEDx talk. So it's called How to Claim Your Leadership Power. So if you just Google Michael Timms, actually, that's probably one of the first things that'll pop up. So I encourage you to check that out. And if you'd like to learn more about how I work with organizations and help them to build a culture of accountability and excellence, you'll be able to find my website and get in touch.
MichaelTimms.com, everybody. And I hope that you'll do that. And before we go, and before Michael and I say our goodbyes, the question that I will ask you, it is an accountability question, everybody, because it's a question based on results. The question I ask every single week is, now what? What will you do with what you got here? It's not, see, the activity is, well, I listened to a podcast. The results come when you take action on what you learned. And I'm not here to tell you what you should take action on, but rather to encourage you, urge you, implore you to ask this question: what will I do now based on what I learned from Michael and Kevin? And I hope that you will answer that question and take those actions, because when you do, you will get better results, and you will be doing exactly what Michael said, which is modeling accountability yourself. Michael, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Everybody, we will be back next week. If you love this, I hope you did. Tell somebody else. Tell them to come join us next week, or come back and listen to this. Or wherever you are listening to this, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes, because we're back every week, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.